When we're looking at a Bronsted-Lowry acid-base reaction, we need to consider the fact that on the other side of the arrow, a new acid and a new base are created. So when we look at this equilibrium, we need to realize that there's an acid on both sides and a base on both sides. And because the reaction's in equilibrium, we need to consider all of them. All of them are involved in the equilibrium. So they typically tend to link these two things together by calling them a conjugate acid-base pair. So on the left-hand side of the arrow, the acid becomes a conjugate base on the right-hand side of the arrow, and likewise, the base on the left-hand side of the arrow becomes a conjugate acid on the right-hand side of the arrow. So these two species are actually linked together by what's called being a conjugate acid-base pair. And when you look at it, you can tell that they are linked together because a conjugate acid-base pair is only different by either the addition or a removal of a hydrogen ion. So when we look at the acid here, HCl, the conjugate base, the hydrogen is removed. Also, when we look at water here, which is the base on the left-hand side of the arrow, by adding a hydrogen to it, we turn it into hydronium and we make it the conjugate acid. So in reality, there is a Bronsted-Lowry acid and base on both sides of the arrow. And we tend to connect those two together so we can understand the relationship between the two. So if we look at another example here, in this case we're looking at a basic type reaction. One of the things you should be able to do is identify the acid-base pairs and understand what's being a base and what's being an acid inside of the overall reaction. The main thing that you need to remember is on both sides of the arrow there needs to be an acid and a base. So when I look at this, on the left-hand side of the arrow, I know ammonium is a weak acid, so that must be the base. Therefore, water in this case is acting as an acid, because if I have a base, I also have to have an acid. To find the conjugate acid of our base, ammonia, all I have to do is add another hydrogen to it, so it becomes NH4 plus or ammonium. That's my conjugate acid in this case. Water, all I have to do is remove a hydrogen, so I go from H2O to OH minus or hydroxide. That is the conjugate base. So these are the two conjugate base pairs that are involved in this acid-base equilibrium.